All right, and welcome to the Modern Job Hunt. This
Hi.
is a show about job hunting in the modern tech landscape. It's 2023 for anyone watching after we're going live, but yeah, we're recording in November of 2023. The layoffs are starting to peter out, but there's still a lot of folks looking for work, so that's what we're here to talk about today. This show is all about how to use AI, how to listen to recruiters' tips, how to work with coaches like Nancy here today. So this episode is all about interview frameworks, case studies, how to prepare for interviews. And I thought, what better person to bring on the show than Nancy Chu, a professional product management coach. So Nancy is a coach that helps people prepare for interviews, helps them ace their interviews, and is really passionate about product thinking and product sense. So, with that said, I'd like to welcome Nancy onto the show.
Thank you so much, Ryan. It's the first time I'm appearing on Ryan's channel, so thank you so much for having me. Ryan and I actually already did a live stream a couple weeks ago, and we decided to do a part two, and this time I'm his guest. So, yeah, I agree with Ryan. I am super passionate about product thinking and product sense, love talking about it. Um, so shoot me some questions and let's get started.
Yeah, and I'd like to thank Nancy. The first LinkedIn Live I ever watched was Nancy's, and it was with a friend of mine, Catherine's, and then and Catherine and I were like, let's just try it out, and so that's what got the ball rolling for this show.
Oh, I
Catherine
didn't
was
know
guest
that.
number one.
Wow.
Yeah, so she was guest number one, and it's just kind of we've been evolving it ever since. So for those of you that are watching this, you can watch this on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. So as I'm taking a product-based approach to the show, you may have noticed the introductions have improved in the last episode or two. I'm now cross-referencing past episodes like Nancy and I just did. Shout out to Nancy for that one. And
That's
then
amazing.
I am also improving my ability for you to find me later, folks. So I now have a QR code up to Koji. So for you, those of you interested in like Linktree, Koji type stuff, you can find more information, YouTube, all that good stuff. I'm also starting to tell people in advance. So if you sign up for the newsletter in there, I will email you in advance because that is, I find, one of the limitations of LinkedIn Live. You can't really roll a list forward to the next episode that easily. And then I'm also building my cover art with DALL-E now as opposed to Midjourney because the lettering is better. So if any of you like logos for this episode, I use DALL-E 3. So I'm testing out some stuff
Can you
on
put
kind of
some of these links somewhere so we can easily find them?
yeah. So I will post them in the description after, like how I used kind of ChatGPT and DALL-E 3 it's incredibly easy now to make cover art for anyone doing podcast or creative work to actually, the letters, getting them right still is really hard, but it's been a fun project working on this thing
I need to
throughout the
try
episode.
this. I've not tried it yet.
It is, I mean, you need the ChatGPT Plus. So I
I
signed up for the
see.
Plus and then I started playing around, like, because I actually write a lot of my questions for these shows with ChatGPT because I kind of bounce around. It's like I brainstorm by myself with an AI, and it's like a
Perfect.
really effective way of kind of preparing for content generation. So that's how I've kind of evolved the show in the last couple episodes. And yeah, with that said, I told you how I prepared for this episode, and now how do you actually work with your clients to prepare for interviews?
I would say I am probably a lot less methodical than you. I go with my feelings. That's the gist of how I prepare for my live streams.
And I think it's interesting because I was watching a bunch of your shorts to prepare for this to interview you, and the empathy you have on there, and the empathy that when we've collaborated, it's like, as a coach, I think that's one of the things, like Nancy's work. If you watch her content out there, there's so much human elements to it, and I think the episode that Catherine and I did, we talked about how job hunting is such an emotional roller coaster with highs and
Mhm.
lows, and I think that's one thing I love about your content and like how you coach people around kind of getting ready for interviews, and the mental journey that it takes place.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for watching my content to prepare for this particular stream. I would say I am definitely more feelings-based, heart-led compared to a lot of people in tech. Yeah, good highlight.
And I think that that's one of the things that, like, I still have nerves. I'm 10 years into my professional career and I still get nervous for almost every interview.
So do I.
I think that's part of why I like doing this show, is that it kind of normalizes the fact that you're going to get nervous. It's going to, like, and how do you work with I think preparation is part of how I reduce my nerves, but like, how do you work with your clients on kind of the nervous, and you work with folks that have gone through meta interviews and some of the most challenging kind of tech companies in the world.
So we always pick a principle as an anchor, and it really depends on the person's inner dialogue. So, for example, one of my mentees right now, they have been rejected in the past, and so there's trauma there. Just the fact that they're doing it again, not the second time, but the third time, takes a lot of courage and takes a lot of self-compassion to even put themselves through this process all over again. I completely empathize with the struggle because I myself failed twice. And I actually have never talked about this, but I failed a Google interview. I don't know how many times. So I know for sure that I failed a Facebook interview twice. The Google interview, even more. And I can't get myself to interview with Google again, even though the last time I interviewed, I passed the screen and I was trying to get myself ready to go for the on-site. I ended up canceling it because it was just too much emotional, like all kinds of feelings associated with it. And so for that particular mentee, the anchor that we decided to use for this preparation is going through this process actually makes us better PMs. And we picked this anchor because I really do believe in the process. I've noticed my own growth after going through the ups and downs of the preparation and then of the rejection and then trying again. I really do feel that I am a better PM because of it. And when I talk to them about this learning that I have and how I genuinely feel the process actually makes sense, it resonated with them also. And so we decided to anchor on that as a way to stay focused in this interview prep. And everyone would have a different anchor. So, for example, another mentee that I have, our anchor is just, I want the brand value associated with it. That's what I want in my career. Okay, let's go for it. Let's use that as the anchor. So yeah, everyone's anchor will be different.
Yeah, I think that's what is unique about job hunting. It's like you have your own motivations, the company has their motivations, and then how do you, and I think that's what I've discovered throughout multiple years of kind of job hunting is understanding yourself is almost the first step in
Yes,
really moving towards like a successful interview. Like, you can practice all the questions in the world, but if you don't really know what you want, I don't think you bring the energy to the interview.
absolutely. Yes. We can also think about it as product market fit, where the product and the job interview process is the market.
And can you tell me about a time where maybe you told your clients to pump the brakes on? I have actually slowed down the amount of work. I'm spending a lot of time on this show, which is super fun. But I've actually reduced the amount of time I'm spending on applying for jobs and getting way more success because I'm having way more fun in life.
Yeah.
So it's something that I've learned after months now in this current climate. And can you kind of tell a story anonymized about kind of how
Right.
you coach your clients to be like, let's just have fun here?
So some people like to think about the process as a sprint and not a marathon. And sometimes they would meet recruiters who are pushy and they try to schedule interviews, let's say 2 weeks out or 4 weeks out. And my recommendation to them would be, we don't need to rush into it. And in fact, if we rush and we're not fully prepared and we don't pass, we have to wait 1 more year to try again. And that means if, let's say, at the 4-week mark, we don't feel fully prepared, whether on a informational level or on an emotional level, let's push out the interview. There's no rush. And in fact, for anyone who is prepping for a FANG style type of interview, I highly recommend taking at least 6 weeks to prepare. And this is with daily prep.
And are most of your clients taking a FANG-based approach, or do you have a real diversity of folks? And are they all product clients, or like what is the norm?
Yeah, I would say, of course, most of my mentees are product managers. The most interesting in terms of profile in a mentee that I worked with was a supply chain manager. And we just worked on behavior interviews. Yeah, which I think some people might overlook, but there's so much depth in behavior interviews that I think should be talked about more.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that I'm seeing is that a lot of companies are learning from FANG and adopting FANG-based models. So for anyone interviewing, the things like product sense, let's dive into product sense, because that was something from kind of the introduction. I would say that 5 years ago, no company outside of FANG was really like, we have a product sense interview as part of our step. But now I feel like it's a lot more common, like across the industry.
It could also be because people from FANG are leaving FANG and going elsewhere, and they bring the practice with them.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation, and kind of having come from FANG yourself, how do you view the kind of extension of the kind of interview process? Like, I don't know when you started your career, was there 5 interviews? Was there 7 interviews? Like, I feel like right now some companies are up to like 10 hours of live content synchronously. It's getting interesting.
It's too much, I feel. When I started, it was around 5, and one of them being a panel interview. And this was back in 2010, maybe. Yeah, around a handful of interviews, but including the screen.
Mm-hmm.
And also including the final round, which is a panel interview. And there was no written assignments. But I maybe around 2013-ish, I had an interview. It had a take-home assignment, and it was a presentation, but it was still around the five rounds of interview mark. It was definitely not 10.
And did you see similar kind of processes internally as for like external applicants? Like if you're inside Meta, is it still 4 or 5 rounds to be an internal candidate?
If you're already a product manager and you want to switch teams, we don't go through formal interviews if you're already a product manager. But if you're not a product manager and you're trying to switch and pivot into product management, then you would go through the same exact process as a external candidate.
Gotcha. And so there are a lot of similarities between FANG companies. And so when you're preparing clients, is there kind of like a prep for a case study, prep for an execution interview, and prep for a product sense? And do you follow like a certain framework all the time?
Yes and no. So yes, there is a framework to approaching case studies or product sense type of interviews, but there isn't one framework that is better than others. There's a lot of different takes on what the framework should be, but there isn't one that is better than another. The gist of the framework is you always start with a problem space before moving into solution space. So if I would say the commonality across all the different frameworks out there, it really just breaks down into two buckets: problem space and solution space.
And kind of when I was doing some reading, you have digital resources and whatnot on your website and in other places. Like, which one of those that you know of would you say, hey, for anyone out there listening, I've got this great piece of resource. I was looking at a bunch of them, so I'm curious which one is your favorite.
I don't know. It depends what your goals are. Because I have a bunch of different resources. So, for example, one of the most popular resource, which, by the way, I didn't think would be popular, but it turns out to be the most popular resource that I offer, is a list of PM leadership interview questions.
And is that for an individual going for a group or a principal role, or is it really just like showing your leadership as a product individual?
So this list of questions get to your leadership capabilities, and leadership comes in different flavors, whether you are managing a team or not. So yes, a portion of the list that I have curated over time does involve people management type of questions, but not all of it.
Well, there you go. It sounds university applicable. So hopefully somebody, from listening to this is clicking and finding Nancy's resources at the moment. I will try to make sure that they're in kind of the YouTube description section after.
Cool,
And
thanks.
little bit of a shout out there later. And I'm curious, like STAR, when I've learned
Yeah,
STAR over so many years, like,
yeah.
is that a framework that you always start out with? What's your view on STAR? Like, so many people say it's the go-to, but I don't know if it's enough for product or because we're starting with the problem space. Like, is it the right thing to do?
I personally am not a fan of STAR. And let me tell you why that is. STAR helps us tell a story, and you have to be a very good storyteller in order to grab the interviewer's attention. From their perspective, they're listening to hundreds of stories a week, sometimes even a day. So if you tell them yet another story of how you launched your previous product, they're not going to be paying a lot of attention. Also, if you are more senior, I really don't recommend the STAR framework. If you're more senior, you need to communicate as a leader. And the way leaders communicate is crisp and direct. STAR is not direct at all. So, what I recommend for more senior product managers is T shaped communication. T is you go broad before you go deep. Another framework that I like, which is not talked about very often, is called BLUF, bottom line up front. You tell them the end result first, and if there's appetite, then you go deeper. It's a little bit the opposite of a product sense. In a way, you're jumping to solution in a behavior or leadership interview. And hopefully that is a good hook for them to want to pay attention to you, to want to keep on listening to you.
That almost mirrors CV design in the sense that people put their metrics on the CV. They don't mention the situation. They don't mention the challenges. It's like, here's the 400%. That's what you want to hear. So I guess with your method, that makes a lot of sense where it's like almost like a narrative hook where you hook them at the start, you bring them in, and then you can kind of unpack the story gradually.
Yeah. Only if needed. Sometimes you don't even need to unpack the story.
Okay. Interesting. And so going deeper into that, how do you feel like that's evaluated from someone that has been taught to follow STAR? Do you think that interviewers tend to accept changing that framework, or how do you find that? And
Yeah,
how do you get feedback from your clients that this is working?
I would say because my approach is on a slightly unconventional side, it would not work. My approach would not work if the interviewer is more junior or not as calibrated. My approach only works if the interviewer is calibrated.
Interesting. Yeah.
So it's a caveat.
So, follow-on question to that. I find the beauty of calendar invites now is that no matter if they tell you who you're interviewing or not, you can usually figure it out pretty easily with an email address and a few things. Like, so do you coach your candidates on preparing for the interviewer as well?
So what I recommend is applying product thinking principles to your job search journey. And the first step in product thinking is user empathy. If we apply that to job search or in an interview setting, you need to know who you're talking to. And so you do have to do a lot of research as much as possible on who the interviewer is and the environment that they're in. So it's not just about looking at their LinkedIn, it's also looking at what kind of organization are they a part of, what is their organizational culture. Some of it you could get a sense by reading the job description really clearly. Sometimes you can pick up the energy behind a particular sentence. So, an example of that could be maybe the job description says you would need to manage stakeholders. Now, the fact that they put that in the job description probably means that that is a very important element of the job. But why is it important? Well, probably because there's a lot of loud and opinionated stakeholders in this role. And it's also likely that PMs in this role have not been successful in the past managing stakeholders. And so you want to read the job description, pick up the energy behind why they're saying these things, and then try to get as much insight as possible from the recruiter on organizational structure and culture as a way to prep for these interviews.
And so one of the individuals that I met throughout my career, it was in CI, competitive intelligence, and he talked about um, foxes following a route, and if they followed the route over and over, they would catch rabbits, and that was
Oh,
his CI approach. He always knew exactly where to look, and he repeated it on a regular basis, and he got little tiny bits of information. So you've mentioned kind of LinkedIn as one piece that you should look at,
mhm.
company culture and picking up off HR. What's kind of your route that you work with clients along to prepare for interviews in terms of information gathering?
It depends because if you're going through a Facebook interview, you don't really need to do that because the structure is very clear and you just prepare for a product sense interview. You just prepare for execution interview. You don't have to do a lot of digging on who you're talking to. Of course you can, but it's the variability is not as high compared to other companies that don't have a standardized practice.
Yeah, I am someone who went into a Meta interview without fully preparing for Meta's
Mhm.
format, and I
Yeah,
can tell everyone listening, prepare for Meta's format because if it's totally different
yeah,
than what you're used to as a typical PM interview, and so I think that's an interesting point that if you know the format, follow the format.
yes. And I highly recommend at least 6 weeks given your commitment to prep every single day.
Yeah, that is great context on like how hard some of these interview processes can be.
Let's reframe because it's not. necessarily hard, like quote unquote hard per se. It's it's a different way of doing things. And when things are different, you need time to adjust. You need to build in muscle memory so that it doesn't feel hard when you're ready.
And how many of your clients or mentees are actively looking for work, and how many are in kind of a reflection growth mode, figuring out what's next for me?
I would say a little bit more than half are actively looking, and less than half, but somewhere between 25% to 50%, somewhere in the middle, they are trying to get promoted.
Gotcha. Okay. And I think that that ties well in with some of your content around manifestation and vision and whatnot, because
Yes.
it's not about just getting, you know, over the hurdle of getting there. So I'm
Mhm.
curious, like, you've that's unique to a lot of the, you know, typically LinkedIn, it's very cut and dry. Your content is far more, that's why I like it, but
Oh,
it's
cool.
far more kind of diverse in its messaging. So can you kind of talk about how you embed that part into your work with clients?
The reason why I love talking about manifestation is it works. And I am living proof that it works. Um, and the word manifestation, because it's not mainstream, some people resist that word. But what it really means is just going after your dreams and having the courage to go after what you really desire. It's nothing more than setting a goal and going after it. But I like using the term manifestation because most of the work involved is setting the right goal. And sometimes when we set goals, especially as product managers, we might get scared to set goals that are aggressive. Or maybe we would set, something a little bit more conservative, something that we could hit with more certainty. But that's not how manifestation works. The goals that we set through the manifestation practice is let's forget all the strings that are attached to a particular desire. Let's not even pay attention to your inner dialogue where you don't feel good enough, or who am I to say that I could get that thing that I want. um, if you are not scared, if you know that you'll be successful no matter what, and if you know that no one will ever get mad at you, what do you really, really want? That is the first step in manifestation. And through my work, in coaching, I want to make it more mainstream that it's okay to even verbalize what you desire. Sometimes that step is hard for people.
Yeah, I think it's really, really well said, what you just said. And I think the beauty of manifestation as opposed to goals is the lightness of it, the
Mhm.
dreaminess of it, and kind of
Yeah.
just you're getting away from kind of like a Gantt chart
Yeah, or
into your
metrics.
mind and where you want to
Yes.
be. And
Yes.
I think so like that is, I think, and when I set this episode up with you, I kind of knew that we would tangent a lot, and going into your content, and hopefully, you know, the listeners and the viewers are just understanding that, like, of course you have to dial in your product sense interview, but
Mhm.
there's all this other human element stuff to job hunting that, like, if you forget about it, it's really hard to just really focus on product sense stuff all the time when you don't know your driving force.
Yes. Yes, and part of the manifestation process is a lot of self-reflection. Because since we already talked about step one, which is getting clear on what you want without anyone judging you, or without you yourself just judging yourself. Step two is Now, what are you telling yourself that you think is preventing you from getting what you want? So if I dial it back to, let's just talk about goal setting in a day-to-day kind of like product management way of setting goals is, well, what's the baseline? Let's try to increase it by 20%, right? That is a bottoms up way of setting goals. But in manifestation, we don't do that. We don't anchor on a baseline because we could do so much more. So, for example, when I was trying to manifest passing the Facebook interview, if I were to choose a baseline, my baseline would be I failed twice. What's the likelihood of failing again the third time? It's very high. So if I approach it with a bottoms up mentality, I would have all these emotional feelings attached to it. Like, who's to say you would pass it again if you already failed twice? Like, clearly, you don't get it. But I want what I want. I'm going to manifest it. And by manifesting it, it just means that that's a thing that I really want. I don't judge myself for wanting it, and I don't care if other people judge me for wanting it. I know what I want, and I'm going to go get it. So what does it take for me to get that thing that I want? Well, I'm going to study my butt off. I need to really understand what they're looking for. I really need to understand their criteria, right? And I follow the process. I treat it like the SATs. That's the mentality. And then there's the emotional layer that's going on in parallel. Like, maybe you're not good enough. Maybe you failed for a reason, right? All of these things, it's when we reflect, it's a invitation to process those feelings and first step is recognizing that it's not true, right? It's not true that just because I failed twice that I would fail again a third time. No one can claim that that is a true statement. It's not factual, right? So then we tease out the facts from the fake stories, and we only anchor on the facts, which is, well, clearly I don't understand what they're looking for, so I'm gonna go study my butt off and just anchor on that.
Well said. I think one of the things we talked about in my last episode with chat hiring managers, and it was an all male panel, and we were talking about tech being fairly male centric in a lot of regards, and we got talking about BIPOC and women being interviewing, and a lot of them said nowadays it's critical that they structure, if they have 5 interviews, they're like, one of them has to be a female, one of them has to be like, and they said, how, because we got talking about how would it feel like to go through your whole round of interviews and only talk to white men all the way through as a female candidate or as a BIPOC candidate. And so I think that, like, my question to you is, like, how do you work with clients that come from a diversity of backgrounds, that go into an environment that may not reflect themselves?
I would say I'm a little bit numb to this because I went to engineering school and I was always the only girl, or maybe one of the 2 girls. And then I became an engineer, again, surrounded by men. And I've been conditioned to the quote unquote reality that women are just the minority. And because I've been conditioned for years and years and years, decades, I became numb to it. But when I became a mom, that's kind of when my sensitivity came back, and I kind of evened out my numbness. Then I started to notice these things a lot more, which is, I did not talk to a single mom on this panel. What's going on? Is this company mom friendly? So my invitation to folks who are looking for their next opportunity is pay attention. So really pay attention to how your body feels when you are talking to these people, and really recognize what is triggering you. If there's any sense of discomfort, even if you can't verbalize it, you need to honor that feeling.
That's really, really well said. And Nancy is having some amazing advice here. So if anyone is watching this live, feel free to comment on LinkedIn or YouTube. We will see your questions and we'll try to incorporate them into the episode. But some amazing kind of views and I think that going to like into case studies, sometimes they're related to the company, sometimes they're related to kind of a mythical product or something like that. How much do you think candidates should kind of push against the company if it's their product? Because I feel like it's always a challenge when it's like knowing as a PM, you know, the backlog is massive and like there's all like, so how do you kind of approach case studies in a sense as a coach of mentees?
So a case study can manifest in two different ways. One is in a format of a product sense question, and the second way is through take-home assignments. Obviously, if it's a product sense type of question, we can't really push back in that moment unless you just want to walk out in that moment. But if it's a take-home assignment, I'm really not a fan of that practice where you ask a candidate to spend hours improving your own product. That I don't think that is a fair practice. If what they want is to get a sense of your PM skills, they can very easily get that sense by asking you to do a case study on a different product that belongs to a different company. Right? So when that happens, when the take-home assignment is based on their own product, unless you're dying to work for that company, I would push back. I would actually ask them if they could give me another question that is more hypothetical. But if it's in a product sense type of setting, this assumes that you have to do kind of basic studying and just understanding of the product, and that you have to do regardless. If you're interviewing for the company, you have to do your basic work, and with the basic work, you should be able to answer it in a product sense interview setting, which is how would you improve this product?
Yeah. I find the take home assignments are challenging. Having interviewed while working, when you're trying to put in a couple hours here and there versus
Yeah.
someone that is not working and may put in 5 hours for every 1 hour they recommend. I think that like, do you think that there is a world where product gets to the elite code type thing that the engineering side goes through, where it's like, okay, there is a quantifiable way of kind of screening candidates as opposed to this kind of 7-step wishy-washy lack of rubric sense that we have right now in the industry?
Well, if you look at the Google and Facebook process, it's as close to the rubric as you can get, pretty much. And they don't do take-home assignments. Why is that? I don't know, but I could guess because it's not needed if you have a close to rubric type of approach. But even with a FANG style rubric driven interview, it's still fluffy compared to an engineering interview. But I think that's just the way it is. It's the nature of the role. I would say though, I actually did enjoy my last take home assignment. It was not on the company's products. It was basically two product sense questions combined. They asked me to present a product that I worked on that I'm the most proud of and take a product and make it more delightful. And I loved it because I'm no longer under the pressure of answering the question under 30 minutes. And so I really did enjoy that take-home assignment. But I would say, though, I spent more than 8 hours prepping.
I think that is one of the beauties of the Fang, as complicated as it is to get into. Like once you learn how to do product sense the Fang way, if another Fang has a product sense relatively similar, you're using the same kind of structure. Whereas I feel like as a Canadian, we don't have as many Fang companies, as many structured companies, and so it is really across the board. And so you're preparing, and it's kind of like I find every single time that I get a no after a few rounds, I'm learning, oh, I got to work on that question or that area. And it's like you're kind of like really, as a product manager, you have like 8-sided kind of hexagon, octagon. You're like trying to work on each side every single time you get a no.
Well, I would say because a lot of the interview process is subjective at the end of the day, I wouldn't beat myself up for it. I literally think about it as product market fit. There is no formula for product market fit for a reason. Same thing as a PM interview. You're just trying to find your product market fit. You're the product, and the hiring manager is the market. And every hiring manager is different.
And okay, this is one I definitely wanted to get into. Some of the common interview mistakes and how do candidates avoid them?
I guess we already talked about not using the STAR framework. It's not necessarily a mistake. I would say STAR framework is fine. To me, it's 101. Like if you can't do STAR, you probably should first learn how to communicate in a structured way. But that's not going to be the differentiator because everyone is using STAR. So not a mistake. In terms of mistake, again, it depends on how senior you are. And this is just my perspective. A lot of product managers are conditioned to believe that they have to ask for direction upfront when they're given a case study question because of the education out there that recommends that what they say is we're clarifying the question, but in reality, you're asking for direction. This works just fine if you're junior, but if you're senior, you really shouldn't be asking for direction. Otherwise, you're not senior because your job is to set direction. So your job is to figure out what the right direction is. Now, in this setting, some people actually don't feel comfortable not asking for direction because they need something to anchor on. Otherwise, it's too ambiguous. When we feel that way, then I invite you to really think on why is setting direction causing me anxiety? Maybe I'm not a senior, and that's okay. But this type of kind of mental exercise is one that we should work on because it makes us know ourselves better. There's that level of self-awareness. If we see ourselves as a senior PM and yet we struggle with setting direction in an interview, it probably is reflecting something back to us. And let's be true and let's be grounded in ourselves before we go into the next interview.
How much of what you embody in your coaching platform is from personal experience as an individual, and how much of it is how you learned how to interview as a manager or a senior leader in large companies in California?
Definitely both, because I am a collection. Yeah, I'm a collection of all of my past experiences that include me failing as a candidate, me finally passing an interview, and then becoming an interviewer, and then becoming a people manager, and then becoming an interviewer interviewing people manager candidates. So I'm a collection of my entire past.
And the reason why I asked is that like you have a lot of knowledge that maybe these large companies have already codified it and put it into their programs, but you're seeing kind of like you come from one world, you're helping the other world. Like you could consult back into some of these companies and some of this amazing stuff that you're bringing up here. I mean, I think that when an interviewer comes in with empathy for the candidate, it also has such a strong ability to accelerate the conversation.
Yeah, and that's why the way I ask interview questions is also slightly different from a lot of other interviewers. So, for example, sometimes I would start the conversation by asking you, what are your hobbies? What do you like to do outside of work? And then you would say exercising or watching sports or whatever it is. And I might just say, well, what tools do you use to support your hobby? And then, people would say, um, I watch a lot of YouTube, or I use Google Flights to search for flights because I love to travel, etc. And then I would say, okay, improve YouTube. Right, so the way I ask these questions, although it's still the same product sense question, improve X, but the lead up is different. And the reason why I do that is because I don't want to ask you a product that you have never thought about, because then it would not be a fair product sense evaluation. Right. So one time I was asked, improve Spotify. I have never used Spotify ever. I'm not a user, but I could guess. But in that situation, I'm not set up for success. And so, based on my experience, and also because I empathize with candidates, I don't want to ask you something that puts you at a disadvantage.
Well said. And kind of one of the last questions before we kind of start rounding it up near the top of the hour is just what sites, tools do you recommend to prepare for interviews? If I'm the ones I'm thinking of are things like Exponent and others. Like as a coach, how do you kind of blend your own personal style with what's out there on the market?
Um, when I was prepping, there were no YouTube videos. So the way I prepped was through reading books. There's the Cracking the PM Interview book and Decode and Conquer. So that's like really old school way of prepping, and it works. Uh, Now with tons of free content on YouTube, and Exponent also has some free content. Those are also very good resources. And now the problem is basically opposite of the problem that I had when I was prepping. There was not a lot of resources, and so we're kind of just operating in the blind. And when we're doing mock interviews, it's like blind leading the blind, unless you get an actual experience and calibrated PM from your dream company to do a mock interview with you. It's hard to even know if you're on track. Now that the problem is the opposite, where there's a lot of resources, but then the root of it is the same as before, which is, well, what is the right thing to do here? Like, which feedback is good feedback? And I would say that's the one of the most challenging problems that people have today, which is what is good? Because sometimes you see conflicting things. Like I might tell you something that is very different from what you hear out there. So my recommendation there is you want to evaluate the source of feedback. And of course, my feedback is very heavily biased because of my experience. And if you want to interview at Facebook, I'm calibrated to give you feedback. But if you want to interview in another company that is very different from Facebook, I'm not the best person to give you calibrated feedback. So here's where you need to pick your source carefully.
I think the other thing is, what is it about the no or the yes that actually advanced you? Did you answer the question really well, or were you just really good in kind of some unique niche area that advanced you? And that's where, like, going back to your product market fit, that's what I've talked about with a few people on the program. Sometimes, like, you're just the best person at this unique AI thing that's needed right now. That propels you forward as opposed to the answer. So, I mean, it's always about preparing and improving, but you never know, like, what is going to connect with the interview company to kind of propel you forward to the next round in the offer.
I would say this reminded me of an interesting experience. One of the offers that I had was because the engineering counterpart really liked my character, not necessarily my experience, but my character. And this is super niche and super interesting, and it's because on my resume at that time, in the last line of my resume, I mentioned something about being a piano soloist with the Honolulu Symphony. That was one of the highlights in my past, and I put on my resume. And he turned it into a conversation with me about it. Turns out his son is like really talented in piano. His son tries to practice, but then it's such a drag sometimes. So like he knows what it takes to be diligent in trying to level up in a musical instrument. And then we turn it into a conversation. And so he voted yes to hire me because of my character, and it's based on my past where he understood the kind of like the emotional strength that you would need to go through like a musical training to get to perform on stage with a symphony. So that led him to say yes, but it's not because of the interview.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's the kind of thing about interviewing. It's a numbers game. Like, how many do you go through to kind of get that, versus that's why you got to shoot on kind of all different lanes, where you got to ace the case study, the product sense, you got to have luck from character, referrals, and every little step.
It's just about stars aligning.
And kind of with that said, I'll flash up Nancy's LinkedIn QR code there. So if you want to learn more about Nancy, you can Google her. You know, she has a coach, Nancy Chu, and that's her LinkedIn there. And through that, you can, her site, you can also find some of those digital resources that we mentioned about those product leadership questions to kind of help you even beyond this episode. And you can find her channel and kind of like and subscribe to get more of her content with her great newsletters. So yeah, that's kind of the end of the episode. For those of you that love this content, we have another recording next Wednesday, November 15th. We're going to be talking to people in the fractional PM sector. So fractional product leadership is becoming increasingly common as companies are trying to figure out how to balance this kind of economic downturn. So for those of you out there that are interested in that,
I'm interested. I'll tune in.
We got one attendee already. So thanks so much, everyone. And if you have any questions or comments after, throw them in the LinkedIn. Nancy and I will try to get back to you, or on YouTube. And yeah, that's about it for today. Thanks, guys.
We actually have an audience, Julie, who tuned in and said hi.
Thanks, Julie. So yeah, Nancy, kind of, do you have any closing statements. You brought together so much information. How can people engage with you other than what I've mentioned today?
Um, you've mentioned all the right channels. Thank you so much for highlighting me. I think the gist of what I really want people to know is manifestation works. It might be woo-woo, but it works.
I think that everyone should try it. I've been a convert since I kind of had the layoff, and I think gratitude and manifestation, I think, is a critical thing to kind of accelerate you into your next job.
Yeah.
And so, not to kind of turn it too quickly, but I'm manifesting more subscribers right now. So if anyone wants to scan that link, I am just having fun with this show. So if anyone wants to learn more, that was the link there. All right, well, I'll wrap it up there and hope everyone has a great day. Thanks, guys.
Yes, thank you, Ryan.